The first sign that the universe hated us was Timmy Haskins, age 9, and a blue jay. It was a perfect Tuesday morning in Harmony Creek, the kind of morning the Chamber of Commerce would have put on a postcard if they weren't all busy using their melds. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue. The air smelled of cut grass and lilac. The blue jay was singing its sharp, cheerful song from a branch of the old oak tree on the Haskins' front lawn. Timmy walked out onto the porch, his face slack and empty. He picked up a rock from his mother's garden. He didn't throw it. He walked very deliberately to the oak tree, and he began to climb. He climbed with a strange, fluid grace he'd never had on the jungle gym at school. When he reached the branch, the blue jay, unafraid of a small boy, just cocked its head. Timmy reached out, not with a child's grab, but with a predator's swiftness. He snatched the bird from the branch. And then, standing on that oak limb, in the perfect morning sun, Timmy Haskins pulled the blue jay apart, feather by feather, limb by limb, until all he held was a warm, wet mess. He dropped the pieces to the lawn below and stared at his red-stained hands, not with horror or with glee, but with a profound and terrifying blankness. Then he started to cry. That was the day the screaming started. But the story, our story, began 6 months earlier. It began with the arrival. They called themselves the Lumina, and they came not in a fleet of warships, but in a single silent vessel shaped like a teardrop of polished obsidian. It hung in the sky over every major city, a dozen of them just hanging there, patient and quiet. There was no invasion, no demands. After a week of global panic, they spoke. The voice was a chorus, a blend of a million gentle tones, and it came for every speaker on the planet at once. They came in peace. They had watched us, they said. They had seen our art, our music, our conflicts, our love. They saw a young, vibrant species on the cusp of greatness or self-annihilation. They wanted to help. They wanted to share. They offered a gift. A cultural exchange, they called it. The gift was a small, smooth, pearl-white device that fit in the palm of your hand. It was called the Meld. They gave them away for free. Billions of them delivered by silent, graceful drones that moved through the cities like ghosts. The Meld, they explained, was not a communication device. It was an empathy device. You held it, you closed your eyes, and you could experience the memories and culture of the Lumina directly. You could see the soaring spires of their home world, feel the texture of their art, hear the complex harmonies of their music. In return, it would non-invasively scan and share the best of humanity. Our joy, our creativity, our moments of profound connection. A bridge between worlds built on shared experience. I was a high school history teacher. My name is Jake Riley. I taught in Harmony Creek, a town that prided itself on being exactly what its name suggested. We weren't a backwater, but we were small enough that you knew the mailman's kids' names. I watched the news like everyone else, with a mix of terror and wonder. When the Melds arrived in our little town, dropped on every doorstep in a neat little box, it felt like Christmas for the whole planet. My students were buzzing. My neighbors were ecstatic. The world, for the first time in my 38 years, seemed united in something other than fear. It was united in joy. I held the Meld in my hand. It was warm to the touch, impossibly smooth, like a river stone polished for 1,000,000 years. There were no seams, no buttons, no charging port. It just was. That first night, I sat in my worn-out armchair, the one with the permanent impression of my body, and I held the Meld. The world was celebrating the greatest moment in human history. The Lumina were our saviors, our big brothers from the stars. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let the future in. The Fury was still sleeping then. We were all still sleeping. We had no idea we were holding a Trojan horse for the soul. The silence of the Lumina ship was not peaceful. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for the prey to fall into the trap. We didn't just open the gates. We welcomed the monster in and gave it a key to every room in the house. The first time I used the meld, it was like nothing I could have ever imagined. History was my life, the collected stories of humanity. I thought I understood the breadth of experience. I was wrong. The moment my mind connected with the device, my shabby little living room dissolved. I wasn't Jake Riley anymore. I was soaring. I wasn't in a body of flesh and bone, but something lighter. Something that swam through the air as easily as a fish through water. I flew through a city of crystalline towers that sang with a soft internal light. The sky was a swirling vortex of colors my human eyes had no names for, violet golds and crimson silvers. I felt a sense of community, a vast and overwhelming connection to billions of other minds. A chorus of shared existence that was beautiful and profound. There were no individuals in the way I understood it. There was just the we. I experienced 1,000 years of their history in what felt like a minute. I saw them evolve from simple light feeders in a gaseous nebula to the architects of star-spanning wonders. It was all there. The art which was sculpted emotion, their music which was the mathematical language of the cosmos. There was no pain, no anger, no fear. It was a perfect, harmonious existence. It was utopia. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my armchair. Tears were streaming down my face. My small, quiet life felt suddenly drab and meaningless in comparison. The meld in my hand was still warm. I felt a desperate, clawing need to go back, to dive into that ocean of perfect harmony again. The feeling was so strong it was physical, an ache in my chest. The next day at school, the atmosphere was electric. The kids weren't just excited, they were transformed. Arguments over homework were replaced with kids sitting together, quietly holding their mouths, their faces serene. Sarah Jenkins, a girl who usually spent her time drawing angry-looking cartoons in her notebook, was explaining to a rapt audience what it felt like to witness the birth of a star from the perspective of a being that was older than mountains. The usual cliques and social hierarchies had evaporated overnight. The jocks were talking to the nerds. The goths were smiling. It was a miracle. A social revolution delivered in a pearly white package. My friend Dave, the town's chief of police, and a man whose optimism had been surgically removed by 20 years on the job, was the only person who seemed immune. I met him for our weekly coffee at the diner. He was stirring his black coffee with a grimace. "You try that thing yet?" he asked, nodding at the meld I had set on the table. "It's incredible, Dave," I said, my voice full of an evangelist's zeal. "It changes everything. It's like seeing in color for the first time." He grunted. He took a sip of coffee. "Marge down at the station used it. Said she saw a symphony of light. Now she just sits at her desk and hums. Hasn't filed a single report all morning." "Maybe that's a good thing," I suggested. "Maybe there are no reports to file." Dave looked at me, his eyes tired and knowing. "Jake, people are people. You can give them a stairway to heaven. They'll still find a way to scuff their shoes on the way up. I've had 0 calls today. Not for a cat in a tree, not for a noise complaint. Nothing. This town has never been this quiet. It's not natural." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was being cynical, but a small part of me knew what he meant. The silence was deep, deeper than a Sunday morning. It was the silence of a held breath. That night I used the meld again. I dove back into the Lumina's perfect world, drank in their serene memories. But this time, just for a flicker of a second, I felt something else. A flash, a brief jarring image that didn't belong. It was a vision of a red landscape under a dying sun, and a feeling cold and sharp, of something ancient and hungry. It was gone before I could grasp it, replaced again by the soaring spires and cosmic symphonies. I dismissed it, a glitch, a misfire in my own brain, projecting my own anxieties onto their perfect world. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. The miracle started to fray at the edges about a week later. It wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 tiny things, like small cuts that you don't notice until you are bleeding all over the floor. It started at the grocery store. Mrs. Gable, a sweet old woman who baked cookies for the church bake sale every year, got into a shouting match with a man over the last carton of organic milk. It wasn't just an argument. Her face was contorted, her voice shrill with the kind of venom I'd never heard from her. "It's mine," she shrieked, clutching the carton to her chest like it was a baby. The man, a pharmacist from downtown, snarled back, his knuckles white. The store manager had to separate them. Everyone else just watched, their faces impassive, holding their own little white melds in their pockets, or purses like worry stones. At school, the serene unity began to crack. The students were still quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet anymore. It was a tense, brooding silence. I saw 2 boys in the hallway bump into each other by accident. No apologies were exchanged. They just stared at each other for a long, heavy moment, their jaws tight before walking away. The air between them felt thick with unspoken violence. My star student Sarah Jenkins, who had been so full of wonder, now looked pale and withdrawn. When I asked her a question in class, she snapped at me. "Just leave me alone," she said, her voice a low growl. Later, I saw her in the library, not reading, just holding her meld. Her eyes shut tight, her face a mask of concentration. She looked like an addict trying to find a vein. The change was everywhere. Drivers who used to wave each other on at the 4-way stop in the center of town now laid on their horns for the slightest hesitation. Neighborly chats over the fence had ceased. People still went through the motions of their lives, going to work, buying groceries, but they moved with a new, jerky impatience. The politeness, the social grease that kept the gears of a small town turning, was gone. It had been replaced by a low-grade, constant irritation. I brought it up with Dave again over coffee. This time the diner was half empty, and the waitress just slapped our mugs down without a word. "It's not just me, right?" I said, keeping my voice low. "You see it too?" Dave nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "My quiet spell is over. Domestic calls are through the roof. Not hitting. Not yet. Just screaming. People who have been married for 40 years screaming at each other over how to load the dishwasher. I had to go to the park because 2 mothers were in a tug-of-war over a swing set with their kids still in the swings." "What's happening, Dave?" "I don't know," he admitted. "It's like everyone woke up on the wrong side of the bed and stayed there. They're all so angry. About nothing." "The meld," I said. "It was the only new thing, the only variable." "Maybe," he said, not dismissing it this time. "But how? It's supposed to be all peace and love and cosmic light shows. Everyone says so." "Everyone says so," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I thought about the perfect harmony of the Lumina, a world without conflict. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe we weren't built for it. Maybe you can't just pour utopia into a human mind without something breaking. Or maybe I thought, with a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, maybe the meld wasn't pouring utopia into us at all. Maybe it was something else. That night I hesitated before picking up my meld. The desire was still there, the pull of that beautiful world. But there was fear now too. I used it anyway. I needed to see. I needed to understand. The crystalline spires rose to greet me. The chorus of minds welcomed me back. But the undertone was there again, stronger this time. A deep resonant thrumming like a vast and distant drumbeat. And with it, a feeling. It wasn't peace. It wasn't harmony. It was a cold, thrilling whisper of power. The kind of power that comes from standing over a defeated enemy. The feeling was terrifying. And a dark, buried part of me, a part I never knew existed, found it exhilarating. The dream came a few nights later. I say dream, but it wasn't like any dream I'd ever had. It was a memory. But it wasn't mine, and it sure as hell wasn't from the Lumina's library of cosmic bliss. I was in the meld state, floating through the usual sea of tranquility. When the world fractured, the singing crystals and violet gold skies shattered like glass. I was somewhere else. I was standing on cracked black earth under a bloated crimson sun. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt meat. I looked down at my hands. They weren't my hands. They were long and spindly, with claws like obsidian shards. I was wearing some kind of biomechanical armor that seemed fused to my skin. I was holding a weapon, a pulsing energy whip of some kind. Before me cowered a creature. It was small and furry, with 6 terrified jewel-like eyes. It was whimpering, a sound that was surprisingly similar to a frightened dog. I felt a surge, not from my mind, but from my gut. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a glorious cleansing fire, a voice which was my own voice but deeper and harsher echoed in my head. Weakness, unfit. Scourge it! I raised the whip. The little creature shrieked. I brought the whip down. I woke up with a gasp, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The meld had fallen from my hand and lay on the floor, glowing faintly. My own hands were clenched into fists so tight my knuckles were white. The feeling from the dream was still there, a phantom limb of fury. It took me a full 10 minutes to calm down, to convince myself it wasn't real. But it had felt more real than the breakfast I'd eaten that morning. It wasn't a story or a vision. It was an experience. I had felt that rage. I had enjoyed it. I called Dave first thing in the morning. I didn't tell him about the clawed hands and the energy whip. I knew how crazy it would sound. I just said, Dave, I had a bad experience with the meld, a really bad one. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Tell me about it, he said, his voice grim. I met him at the station. It was cleaner than I'd ever seen it. Because Marge, the humming receptionist, had apparently developed a furious obsession with scrubbing things. She was attacking a filing cabinet with a sponge and a bucket of suds, her movements sharp and aggressive. Dave led me into his office and shut the door. Okay, Jake, talk. It's showing me things, I said. Violent things, it feels like. Like I am the one doing them. And T here is this feeling, this rage. Dave leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. He looked exhausted. You are not the first, he said quietly. I've had 3 people come in here in the last 2 days. Old man Hemlock said he dreamed he was leading a cavalry charge and burning down a village. a village of things that looked like caterpillars. Maria from the bakery dreamed she was a gladiator in an arena, fighting to the death. She said she won. She seemed proud of it. "My God," I whispered. "So it's not just me, number, it's not just you. But for every one person who comes in here scared, there are 100 out there who are leaning into it. You see it in their eyes. They're spoiling for a fight. The whole town is a powder keg, and everyone's holding a match." He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The Lumina ambassadors, the ones who set up that cultural center downtown, they just smile. I went and talked to them, told them their devices might be malfunctioning. They looked at me with those big, placid eyes and said, "The meld only shares what is there. Perhaps humanity has a greater capacity for experience than you realized." "That's a load of crap," I said, a flash of the dream rage making me clench my fists again. "They're lying. Of course they're lying," Dave said, turning back from the window. "The question is, what are they lying about? Is this an accident? Or is this the whole point?" We both knew the answer. We just didn't want to say it out loud. The cultural exchange wasn't about sharing their peace. It was about awakening our fury. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a feature. The powder keg finally blew on a Saturday. The town council had called a meeting to discuss the recent rise in public discord, a hilariously understated way of putting it. The meeting was held in the high school gymnasium, the same place I watched teenagers play basketball and stumble through awkward school dances. It was packed. Nearly half the town was there, and the air was wrong. It was thick with a silent, simmering hostility. Everyone sat stiffly, not speaking to each other. Many of them were clutching their melds. Mayor Thompson, a man whose greatest political achievement was getting new benches for the town square, stood at the podium, looking nervous. He started talking about community, about Harmony Creek's long history of neighborliness. He was 5 minutes into his speech when the shouting started. It began with Mr. Abernathy, the hardware store owner, who stood up and accused his next-door neighbor of intentionally letting his dog dig up his prize-winning petunias. The neighbor, a mild-mannered accountant named Fred, leaped to his feet and screamed that Abernathy's wind chimes were a deliberate act of sonic terrorism. Then a woman in the third row shrieked that the mayor had embezzled funds from the 4th of July fireworks display 3 years ago. The accusation was insane, but it didn't matter. It was the spark. In seconds, the entire gymnasium erupted. It wasn't a debate. It was a collective roar of pure, undiluted rage. People were screaming at each other, faces purple, veins bulging in their necks. The accusations were petty, nonsensical grievances that had been magnified into capital crimes. A dispute over a parking space became a blood feud. A forgotten loan of $20 was treated like a betrayal of mythic proportions. I was standing near the back with Dave. We watched in horror as the social contract of our town dissolved in real time. These were people I had known my whole life. I had taught their children. I had borrowed sugar from them. Now they looked at each other with murderous hatred in their eyes. The shouting escalated to shoving. Then a punch was thrown. A man I recognized from the PTA tackled another man over a row of folding chairs. The sound of the crash was like a starting gun. The gymnasium became a swirling vortex of violence. It wasn't a riot in the way you see on the news, with a clear purpose or target. It was chaos. A war of all against all. Neighbor turning on neighbor, friend turning on friend. I saw Mrs. Gable, the sweet old lady from the grocery store, swing her heavy purse like a mace, catching a man squarely in the face. He went down, and she looked at him with cold reptilian satisfaction. Dave, and his 2 deputies were hopelessly outnumbered. They tried to intervene to pull people apart, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a bucket. For every fight they broke up, 3 more started. They were just swept up in the tide of fury. I wasn't immune. I felt the thrumming rage rising in my own chest. The air was electric with it. A part of me, that dark, ugly part the meld had shown me, wanted to join in. It wanted to grab the nearest person and scream and hit and release the terrible pressure that was building inside me. I saw a man near me get pushed, and he turned, his eyes landing on me. "What are you looking at, teacher?" He snarled. For a second, I almost snarled back. My hands clenched. The world narrowed to a tunnel with his stupid, angry face at the end of it. But then I saw the meld in his hand, its pearly surface almost glowing in the dim light of the gym. It was the device. It wasn't him. It wasn't any of them. Not really. This rage wasn't ours. It had been planted in us. I grabbed Dave's arm. "We have to get out of here," I yelled over the din. "We can't do anything." He had a split lip and his uniform was torn, but he nodded. We pushed our way through the flailing bodies, through the screams and the curses and the sound of breaking chairs. We stumbled out of the gymnasium doors and into the quiet evening air. The sounds of the madness inside were muffled, but still audible. The heart of our town was tearing itself apart. The Trojan horse was open. The soldiers were pouring out, and they were us. The days after the town hall massacre, as the local news was calling it, were surreal. Harmony Creek was a wounded animal, quiet and sullen. The riot had burned itself out, leaving behind dozens of injuries, a shattered gymnasium, and a deeper, more profound damage. The rage hadn't gone away. It had just gone back underground, festering. The Lumina ambassadors issued a formal statement. They were deeply saddened by the event. They suggested that perhaps humanity's passionate nature was more volatile than they had anticipated. They offered counseling through their own serene, smiling representatives. It was the most infuriatingly condescending thing I had ever heard. They were the arsonists offering to help rebuild the burned-down house. Dave and I knew we couldn't go to the authorities. Who were the authorities? The state police? The FBI? They were all using the melds. The whole world was. Complaining about the meld was like complaining about the air. You'd be dismissed as a crank, or worse, a Luddite, trying to hold back progress. We were on our own. I became an unwilling expert in the dark corners of the internet. I spent hours every night, fueled by black coffee and a growing sense of dread, searching for anyone else who saw what was happening. Mainstream social media was a wasteland of praise for the Lumina. Any post questioning the melds was shouted down by a chorus of angry users. Their words dripping with a familiar, disproportionate rage. They were called anti-sharing or regressives. It was a global gaslighting campaign. Finally, I found it. A message board hidden on an encrypted network with a simple, stark title, The Fury. It was a small community of people from all over the world. A doctor from Germany, a software engineer from India, a retired soldier from Brazil. They all had the same story. The initial wonder of the meld, followed by the creeping unease, the flashes of violence, the rage. They had all seen their communities, their families, start to tear themselves apart. One user, who went by the name Cassandra, had a theory. She was the software engineer from Bangalore. Her posts were clear, logical, and terrifying. "They are not malfunctioning," she wrote. "The code is perfect. I have analyzed the low-level energy patterns. The mall does two things. First, it presents a curated library of serene experiences. This is the bait. It makes us lower our mental defenses. It makes us receptive. Second, it plants a seed, a mimetic virus, but it's not a set of ideas, it's an emotion. Pure, weaponized rage. It's designed to overwrite empathy and cooperation. Why? Another user asked. Why would they do this? Cassandra's reply chilled me to the bone. Think of it from their perspective. They are a perfectly harmonious, collectivist society. To a society like that, our individualism, our conflict, our messy emotions would look like a chaotic, inefficient cancer. But what if their harmony isn't built on peace? What if it's built on the absolute suppression of everything that isn't the collective? What if, in their ancient past, they were like us, and they cured themselves by embracing a single unifying principle? What if that principle was rage, a predator's rage? The drive to eliminate all that is different, all that is weak. They aren't trying to destroy us with bombs. They are trying to remake us in their own image. It made a horrible kind of sense. The Lumina weren't conquering us. They were converting us. They were missionaries of fury. I showed the message board to Dave. He read Cassandra's posts in silence, his face growing grimmer with every word. So they're not hypocrites, he said when he was done. They really are sharing their culture. The culture is just based on being the meanest thing in the valley. Exactly, I said. And the whole world is mainlining it. We needed to do something, but what? We couldn't fight an emotion. I started watching the Lumina ambassadors in town. There were 3 of them. They moved through Harmony Creek with a calm, detached grace. They smiled their serene smiles. But now, I saw something else in their eyes. It wasn't peace. It was the patient, unblinking stare of a crocodile waiting for its prey to bleed out. One afternoon, I followed one of them. It drifted, I can't call it walking, to the edge of town, to Miller's Pond. It just stood there, staring at the water. I hid behind a thicket of trees, my heart pounding. A flock of ducks landed on the pond, quacking and splashing. The Lumina's head tilted slightly. Its serene expression didn't change, but I felt it. A cold wave of that same predatory rage I'd felt in my dream. It washed over me from 50 yards away, a psychic blast of pure malice. The ducks suddenly fell silent. They took off in a panic, squawking with terror. The Lumina stood there for another minute, then turned and drifted back toward town, its placid mask firmly back in place. It hadn't moved a muscle. It had just, through pure, hated them. And it had been enough. We had to know for sure. We needed proof, something more than a gut feeling and a hidden message board. The Lumina had set up their cultural center in the old library. A beautiful stone building that had been mostly empty since everyone got a portal to a perfect alien world in their pocket. Dave still had a master key from his days as a beat cop. It was a stupid, reckless plan, but it was the only one we had. We went late at night, 2 days after the pond incident. The streets of Harmony Creek were deserted. Not a peaceful quiet, but an empty quiet. The silence of a house where everyone is in their own room, simmering. The library was dark. The Lumina didn't seem to need lights. Dave's hand trembled slightly as he slid the key into the heavy oak door. It turned with a loud grating click that echoed in the silence. We slipped inside, closing the door gently behind us. The air inside was cool and still. The main room, where the checkout desk and reading tables used to be, was empty. The Lumina had cleared everything out. There were no computers, no desks, no sign of their technology at all. Just a vast open space. What are we even looking for? Dave whispered, his voice tight. I don't know, I whispered back. Anything that's not on the official tour. We moved through the hushed darkness, our flashlights cutting nervous beams through the gloom. We checked the offices, the back rooms. Nothing. It was all sterile, empty. It felt less like an embassy and more like a stage set. Finally, we found a door we hadn't seen before. It was in the basement, where the old archives used to be. It wasn't on the building's original floor plan. It was seamless, made of the same pearly material as the malls, and it hummed with a low, barely audible energy. There was no handle, no lock. Well, Dave said grimly, that's probably where they keep the good stuff. We had no way to open it. I ran my hand over the smooth surface. It was warm, like the meld. On impulse, I pulled my own meld from my pocket. I hadn't used it since the riot. The desire was gone, replaced by a deep-seated fear. I held it up to the door. The humming intensified. The meld in my hand grew warmer, and a soft light emanated from the door where my device touched it. With a soft sighing sound, a section of the wall slid open. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We stepped through the doorway. We were not in a room. We were in a gallery. And it was a gallery of horrors. The space was vast, lit by a dim red light. And all around us were projections, holographic scenes playing out in silent, repeating loops. These were not the serene vistas from the meld. This was the truth. This was their real culture. In one scene, creatures that looked like the ones from my dream, with their obsidian claws and biomechanical armor, were systematically exterminating the furry, six-eyed beings. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. A pest control operation. In another, they were turning their weapons on each other. Two factions of Lumina, identical in appearance, tearing each other apart in a landscape of fire and ruin. The victors stood over the vanquished, and I felt a psychic echo of that same triumphant, cleansing rage. There were displays of their art. Sculptures that weren't made of crystal, but of the twisted, fused skeletons of a dozen different alien species. There were murals that depicted not the birth of stars, but the destruction of worlds, entire planets cracked open like eggs. Cassandra was right. Their harmony wasn't peace. It was unity forged in the fires of absolute conquest. They had waged a holy war against weakness, against diversity, against individuality, first on their own world, and then across the stars. They had purged it from themselves, becoming a monument to a single terrible emotion. And now they were here to give us the same gift. The gift of their fury. I looked at Dave. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a cop's weary understanding of the evil men can do. But this was something else. This was an evil that was patient, cosmic, and utterly convinced of its own righteousness. It's a history museum, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This is who they are. They're not sharing culture, Dave said, his voice hard as iron. They're spreading a disease. We heard a soft chime from the doorway behind us. The door was sliding shut. We were trapped. Then a figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the gallery. It was one of the Lumina ambassadors. It drifted toward us, its placid face a perfect, unreadable mask. The meld only shares what is there, it said, its voice a calm, gentle chorus. We are so pleased you are taking an interest in the deeper aspects of our story. Now you can truly understand. Now you can become like us, perfect, pure, strong. For a second we were frozen. The Lumina ambassador drifted closer, its serene expression in obscene contrast to the holographic horrors playing out around us. My mind was screaming to run, but my feet felt bolted to the floor. Dave. Thank God for Dave reacted first. He didn't draw his gun. He knew instinctively that it would be useless. Instead, he grabbed my arm and hauled me backward. The door, he yelled. We scrambled back to the entrance, but it was sealed shut, as seamless as the wall. The Lumina didn't hurry. It just continued its slow, graceful approach. There is no need for alarm, its choral voice echoed in the gallery. The transition can be jarring at first, but you will find the clarity of purpose to be liberating. That word, liberating, snapped me out of my panic. It was the word a cult leader would use. We were trapped in a room with a monster that thought it was a savior. I fumbled in my pocket for my meld, the one I had used to open the door. I pressed it against the seam, praying it would work in reverse. Nothing happened. The Lumina was only 20 feet away now. I could feel that cold wave of hatred rolling off it again, stronger than ever. It wasn't an attack. It was just its presence, its natural state. Like a refrigerator hums, the Lumina radiated pure malice. Dave shoved me aside. Let me try, he grunted. He didn't have a meld. He never took one. Instead, he slammed his shoulder into the door. It was like hitting solid rock. He grunted in pain, but did it again and again. The Lumina paused, its head tilting in that curious bird-like way. Your resistance is illogical, it said. It is a symptom of the chaos we have come to cure. Why cling to your pain, your fear, your weakness? Let it all be burned away by the fury. That was it. That was the key. The fury, I repeated out loud. It's an energy, Dave. It's a signal. My mind was racing, connecting the dots from Cassandra's posts, from the dream, from the feeling rolling off this creature. It's broadcasting this feeling. The melds are just receivers. They tune us into its frequency. Great Jake. Dave grunted, backing away from the door, his shoulder aching. So we're all just radios, playing their hate music. How do we turn it off? We don't, I said, a desperate, insane idea forming in my head. We can't, but maybe. Selbsttransmitisch. I looked at the Lumina. It was a transmitter. A living, breathing psychic beacon of rage. But we were human. What did we have that they didn't? What was the opposite of their cold, unifying fury? The answer was so simple, so human. It felt almost stupid. Chaos, messiness, love, grief, joy, fear. All of it. Our jumble of conflicting, illogical, beautiful emotions. That was our strength. Dave, I said, my voice shaking. I need you to trust me. I need you to think about the worst day of your life. He looked at me like I was crazy. What? The worst day, I repeated, my eyes locked on the approaching alien. The day your dog died, the day your dad left, the call you had to make to that family after the car crash on Route 9. Feel it, all of it. The sadness, the grief. Then I did the same. I thought about my mother's funeral, the hollow feeling in my chest, the smell of the hospital room, the unending gray sadness. I let it wash over me, the raw, painful grief. At the same time, I thought about the best day of my life. My college graduation, my parents so proud. The first time I stood in front of a class and felt that spark of connection with a student. The joy was just as powerful, just as real. I took all of it, the whole messy, contradictory stew of my humanity, and I focused it. I didn't have a meld, but I had a mind. I pictured that jumble of feelings as a shield. The Lumina stopped. It was 10 feet away now. Its placid face twitched. For the first time, an expression flickered across its features. It looked confused, annoyed. "What is this? Brew. Noise," it said, its voice losing some of its harmony. "This static, it is impure." "It's us," I said, pushing the feeling out harder. "It's everything you threw away." Dave caught on. I saw his face change. He closed his eyes, his expression becoming a mask of pain. He was a cop in a small town. He had a deep well of tragedy to draw from. The air in the room shifted. The cold, clean signal of the Lumina's rage was being disrupted by our messy, chaotic human emotions. The holographic displays around us began to flicker and distort. The Lumina took a step back, raising a spindly hand as if to ward off a physical blow. "Cease," it commanded, its voice now a harsh, discordant shriek. "Cease this. Fail. Chaos." The door behind us hissed open. It couldn't maintain the lock. Our psychic noise was interfering with its systems. We didn't wait. We scrambled through the opening and slammed the heavy oak door of the archive room shut behind us, plunging ourselves into the basement's darkness. We could hear it on the other side, a sound I will never forget. It was the sound of pure fury, no longer cold and controlled, but raw and shrieking. A thwarted god having a tantrum. We had found their weakness. It was us. We ran. We didn't stop until we were blocks away, gasping for breath in the alley behind the diner. The shrieking from the library had faded, but the psychic echo of it still rang in my ears. "What was that?" Dave panted, leaning against the brick wall. "What did we just do?" "I think," I said, my own voice trembling, "we just found a way to fight back." But the problem was immense. We had pushed back one Lumina for a few minutes. There were 2 more in town, thousands of them across the planet, and billions of humans were now hardwired to receive their signal of fury. The whole world was a ticking time bomb. The town's annual Founders' Day festival was the next day. It was supposed to be a day of parades, barbecues, and fireworks. Now, I realized, it was going to be a bloodbath. It was the perfect flashpoint. A huge crowd of people, all simmering with a planted rage, packed into the town square. One wrong look, one jostled elbow, and it would be the gymnasium riot all over again, but bigger and in the open. We had to do something before then. We couldn't go to the library and fight them head on. That was suicide. We needed to broadcast our own signal. We needed an amplifier. "The school," I said. "The PA system. The radio station. The high school has a low-power FM transmitter for their student radio," Dave said, his mind already working the problem. "It only covers a few miles, but it covers the whole town." It was a crazy, desperate long shot. A plan straight out of a B-movie, but it was all we had. We spent the rest of the night gathering our resistance. It wasn't much. We found Maria from the bakery, the one who had the gladiator dream, but had been terrified by it. She was hiding in her apartment, her meld smashed to pieces in the trash. We found Old Man Hemlock, who had barricaded himself in his house after his dream of burning the caterpillar village. And we found Sarah Jenkins, my student. I found her sitting on a park bench, rocking back and forth, crying. She had tried to stop using the meld, but the withdrawal was agony. The fury, she said, was always there, scratching at the inside of her skull, wanting to get out. There were 5 of us. A teacher, a cop, a baker, an old man, and a teenage girl. A pathetic little army against a cosmic horror. We broke into the high school an hour before dawn. Dave disabled the alarm system. We made our way to the small, cramped room that housed the student radio station, KHSD, the Bulldog. The equipment was old, but it worked. The plan was simple and insane. We couldn't broadcast a single emotion like the Lumina did. Our strength was our chaos. So we were going to broadcast chaos. We would become the signal. I stood at the microphone. Dave was at the controls, ready to flip the switch. Maria, Mr. Hemlock, and Sarah were gathered around me. We were all terrified. We had to generate an emotional signal strong enough to drown out, or at least interfere with the psychic broadcast of 3 Lumina and the latent rage in 10,000 of our neighbors. "Okay," I said into the dead mic, my voice shaking. "Everybody ready?" They nodded, their faces pale in the dim light. Think about it all. Everything. The good, the bad. Your first kiss. The time you fell off your bike. The smell of Thanksgiving dinner. The fear you feel right now. Don't filter it. Don't hide from it. Just feel it. Be human. Be messy. Be loud. Dave gave me a thumbs up. He flipped a switch. The on-air light blinked red. I took a deep breath, and I started talking. I didn't talk about aliens or fury. I talked about Harmony Creek. I talked about coaching Little League and seeing a kid get his first hit. I talked about the specific sadness of seeing a "for sale" sign on a friend's lawn. I let my own messy, contradictory feelings pour out. Next to me, Maria started to cry softly, thinking of her grandmother's recipes. Mr. Hemlock stared at the wall, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek, lost in a memory of his late wife. Sarah started to hum a tune, a simple, sad little song. We didn't know if it was working. We were just 5 people in a tiny room, pouring our hearts out into a microphone. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from one of Dave's deputies, a good kid named Miller who we had told to watch the town square. "Something's happening. People are stopping. They look confused." My heart leaped. It was working. We were broadcasting our static, our human noise, and it was breaking through their signal. Then the door to the radio station burst open. It wasn't a person. It was the 3 Lumina ambassadors. They stood there, their bodies crackling with a visible aura of red energy. Their serene masks were gone, replaced by faces of pure, incandescent rage. "You will be silenced," their voices shrieked, a discordant blast of sound and hate that felt like a physical blow. The fight for Harmony Creek wasn't going to be won from a distance. It was here. The psychic pressure from the 3 Lumina was a physical force. It slammed into us a wave of pure hatred that made the air feel thick and heavy. The lights in the radio station flickered. My knees buckled. The urge to lash out, to scream, to smash the microphone was immense. The fury was no longer a subtle whisper. It was a roaring inferno, and we were standing at its heart. Sarah screamed and fell to the floor, clutching her head. Mr. Hemlock gasped, his face turning ashen. But Dave, bless his stubborn cop's heart, stood his ground. He drew his service pistol. "Get away from them!" He roared, his voice a shield of pure mortal defiance. The lead Lumina didn't even look at him. Its gaze was fixed on the microphone, the source of the interference. "Your chose is an abomination," it shrieked. It raised a spindly hand, and a bolt of red energy, like solid rage, shot toward the control board. But Maria, the baker, moved faster than I would have thought possible. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it with all her might. It spun through the air and crashed into the Lumina's outstretched arm. The creature let out a hiss of pain and surprise, its arm spasming. The energy bolt went wide, blasting a hole in the wall with a deafening boom. That one act of simple physical defiance broke the spell. We weren't just psychic targets anymore. We were in a fight. I grabbed the microphone stand, a heavy steel thing, and swung it like a baseball bat at the nearest alien. It connected with a dull thud. The creature stumbled back, its placid face for the first time showing something like shock. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. They were the gods. We were the primitives, meant to be converted or purged. We weren't supposed to fight back with fire extinguishers and microphone stands. The battle was a blur of human desperation against alien arrogance. Dave laid down covering fire, not trying to hit them, but to force them back. The loud bangs of the gun, another layer of chaotic, human noise in the room. Sarah, seeing what Maria had done, got to her feet. She started singing. Not a sad hum this time, but her high school's fight song. A stupid, rah-rah tune, belting it out at the top of her lungs with tears streaming down her face. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was powerfully, defiantly human. The Lumina shrieked in frustration. Our messy, unpredictable emotions were poisoned to their clean, orderly rage. They couldn't get a psychic lock on us. We weren't a single signal they could overwrite. We were a symphony of noise. I kept talking into the microphone, my voice hoarse. I wasn't making sense anymore. I was just listing things. Blueberry pie. The fear of public speaking, the smell of old books. Laughter. Grief. Getting a flat tire. Sunsets. Every word was a bullet in our strange psychic war. The lead Lumina, recovering its composure, focused its energy. It ignored us and aimed for the transmitter itself. We couldn't stop it. But just as it was about to fire, the on-air light on the console flickered and died. The power to the school went out. The town, in a last convulsive spasm of meld-induced rage, had overloaded the local power grid. The Lumina froze. Their weapon, the very thing they were trying to destroy, was gone. And in the sudden silence with the rage signal cut off, something else happened. The people of Harmony Creek, who had been on the verge of tearing each other apart, stopped. The psychic broadcast that had been whipping them into a frenzy was gone. They were left with the echoes of it, a horrible emotional hangover. They looked around, dazed and confused, at their neighbors, at their own clenched fists. The spell was broken. The three Lumina in the radio station looked at each other. Their mission here had failed. With a final parting wave of bitter hatred, they turned and drifted out of the room, their movements no longer graceful, but stiff with defeat. They vanished into the dawn. We had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. We stood in the wrecked, silent room, 5 survivors in the aftermath of a war nobody would ever know was fought. The world outside our little town was still in chaos. The melds were still out there. The Lumina was still in orbit. We had won a single battle. The war for the soul of humanity had just begun. I looked at Dave, at Maria, at Mr. Hemlock, at Sarah. We were exhausted, bruised and terrified. But we were still here. We were still human. The cultural exchange had been a Trojan horse, designed to fill us with their fury. But they had miscalculated. They didn't understand that humanity's heart was a messy, chaotic, illogical place, already filled to the brim with its own brand of beautiful, terrible madness. They came to replace our story with theirs, but they had only reminded us of what it meant to be human. And we would have to keep reminding ourselves, every day, if we were going to survive what came next. The silence of the dawn was broken by the sound of a single distant siren. A new day was beginning, a harder day.